Good morning to all of you who have decided to pop in and participate in our FOSA chess event. I hope all of you are well and excited to start this amazing webinar. To begin with, what is FOSA? FOSA stands for Farook College Old Students Alumni. Farook College is a government-aided, autonomous arts and science college founded by the late Maulana Ahmed Ali, which was accredited by NAAC at a 5-star level in 2002 and bagged 71st rank among the national level colleges in 2019. FOSA Canada was founded in 2018 under the leadership of Mr. Abdun Nazir. Without further ado, our FOSA family here in Canada, along with the chapter leaders from FOSA Dubai, UK, and US, would now like to welcome you all to this webinar on chess strategies and tactics. Fun, and leave with more knowledge and interest in chess by the end of the session. I shall now welcome the President of FOSA Canada, Haseena Mehfil, to share a few words with us.
Assalamu alaikum. എല്ലാവർക്കും നമസ്കാരം. 2018 വളരെ കുറഞ്ഞ മെമ്പേഴ്സോട് കൂടി ആരംഭിച്ച ഫോസ കാനഡ ഇപ്പോൾ ഒരുപാട് വളർന്നിരിക്കുകയാണ്. ജാതി, മത, രാഷ്ട്രീയ വ്യവസ്ഥകൾക്ക് അതീതമായ സൗഹൃദവും പഠിച്ച സ്ഥാപനത്തോടുള്ള അഗാധമായ പ്രതിബദ്ധതയുമാണ് ഇത്തരം പൂർവ്വ വിദ്യാർത്ഥി സംഘടനകളുടെ അടിത്തറ. ഫറൂഖ് കോളേജിന്റെ മുദ്രാവാക്യമായ ഓററ്റ് ലബോറ അർത്ഥമാക്കുന്നത് പോലെ പ്രാർത്ഥിച്ചും പ്രയത്നിച്ചും നന്മകൾ നിറഞ്ഞ ഈ കൂട്ടായ്മ ഇനിയും ഏറെ മുന്നോട്ട് പോകും എന്നാണ് ഞങ്ങളുടെ വിശ്വാസം. ഫോസ കാനഡ ആദ്യമായി ആഗോളതലത്തിൽ സംഘടിപ്പിക്കുന്ന ഈ വെബിനാറിൽ പങ്കെടുക്കാനെത്തിയ നിങ്ങൾ ഓരോരുത്തരെയും ആശംസകൾ അർപ്പിക്കാൻ എത്തിയവരെയും ഫോസ കാനഡയുടെ പേരിലും എൻ്റെ സ്വന്തം പേരിലും ഞാൻ ഹാർദമായി സ്വാഗതം ചെയ്യുന്നു. താങ്ക് യു.
Thank you for your warm welcome. I would now like to invite our chapter leader from FOSA India, Mr. Yousuf to share some words.
Hello. Can you hear me? Okay. FOSA Canada President, Haseena, other office bearers, and chapter representatives from different countries. യഥാർത്ഥത്തിൽ വളരെയധികം സന്തോഷം തോന്നുന്ന ഒരു മുഹൂർത്തത്തിലാണ് ഞാൻ നിങ്ങളുടെ കൂടെ ഈ ഒരു വെബിനാറിൽ ജോയിൻ ചെയ്യുന്നത്. ഫോസ കാനഡ ഒരു ചെറിയൊരു കൂട്ടായ്മയാണ് എങ്കിലും അവര് വളരെ സുത്യർഹമായ രീതിയിലുള്ള പ്രവർത്തനങ്ങളൊക്കെയും തുടങ്ങി വെച്ചിരിക്കുകയാണ്. അതില് പ്രസിഡന്റിനെ പ്രത്യേകമായി അഭിനന്ദിക്കാൻ ഞാൻ ഈ അവസരം ഉപയോഗിക്കുകയാണ്. ഫറൂഖ് കോളേജ് ഓൾഡ് സ്റ്റുഡൻസ് അസോസിയേഷനെ സംബന്ധിച്ച് പറയുകയാണെങ്കിൽ ഒരുപക്ഷെ ഇന്ത്യയിലെ ഏതൊരു കോളേജിൽ നിന്നും ഇല്ലാത്ത തരത്തിലുള്ള അത്രയും വലിയൊരു അലുമിനി നെറ്റ്വർക്കോട് കൂടി പ്രവർത്തിക്കുന്ന ഒരു അസോസിയേഷനാണ്. നമ്മുടെ വിദേശ ചാപ്റ്റേഴ്സ് മാത്രം തന്നെ ഇറ്റ് കം ടു അബൌട്ട് 14 to 15 ചാപ്റ്റേഴ്സ്. നമ്മുടെ ഏറ്റവും വലിയൊരു സ്ട്രെങ്ത് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് കോളേജിന്റെ ഇൻഫ്രാസ്ട്രക്ചറും അതേപോലെ അക്കാഡമിക് ലെവലിലൊക്കെയും കോളേജിനെ സ്ട്രെങ്തൻ ചെയ്യുന്ന ഈ ഓവർസീസ് അലുമിനി കൂട്ടായ്മയാണ് എന്ന് പറയാതിരിക്കാൻ നിവൃത്തിയില്ല. നമ്മൾ കോളേജിലേക്ക് കടന്നു വരുമ്പോൾ അതിന്റെ ഓരോ ലാൻഡ്മാർക്സ്, ഗേറ്റ്, രാജ ഗേറ്റ് കടന്നു കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ തന്നെയും കാണുന്ന പ്രധാനമായിട്ട് ലാൻഡ്മാർക്സ് ഒക്കെയും നമുക്ക് കാണാം. അതൊക്കെ നമ്മളുടെ അലുമിനിയുടെ കോൺട്രിബ്യൂഷൻസ് ആണ് എന്നുള്ളതാണ്. ഇങ്ങനെ ഒരു വെബിനാർ നിങ്ങൾ തിരഞ്ഞെടുക്കുമ്പോൾ സ്വാഭാവികമായിട്ടും റിസോഴ്സ് പേഴ്സൺ ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഫൗസ് മെഹ്ഫിൽ ഡെഫിനറ്റ്ലി ഞാൻ വിചാരിക്കുന്ന ഹസീനയുടെ മോനാണ് എന്നുള്ളതാണ്. ഈ ഒരു മേഖല എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്, ചെസ് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് നമുക്കറിയാം മറ്റ് ഏതൊരു സ്പോർട്ടിംഗ് ഈവന്റിനേക്കാൾ ഇന്ന് ലോക തലത്തിൽ ശ്രദ്ധയാകർഷിക്കുകയും വളരെ ഡിഫറെന്റ് ആയിട്ട് ഒരു ഇന്റലക്ച്വൽ ലെവലിൽ നിന്നുകൊണ്ട് ചെയ്യേണ്ടുന്ന ഒരു ഗെയിം എന്നുള്ള നിലക്ക് സ്വാഭാവികമായിട്ടും അതിന് വേണ്ട തരത്തിലുള്ള അതിന്റെ സ്ട്രാറ്റജീസും ഗെയിം പ്ലാനിനെ കുറിച്ചുള്ള ഒരു വെബിനാർ ചെയ്യുമ്പോൾ അതിൽ റിസോഴ്സ് പേഴ്സൺ ആയിട്ട് ഇത് പ്രസന്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നത് ഒരുപക്ഷെ പ്രൊവിൻഷ്യൽ ചെസ് ടൂർണമെന്റിൽ റണ്ണറപ്പായി വരികയും ധാരാളം ചെസ് ടൂർണമെന്റിൽ പങ്കെടുക്കുകയും ചെസ് ഒരു പാഷനായിട്ട് കൊണ്ടുവരികയും ചെയ്യുന്ന ഫൗസ് മെഹ്ഫിലാണ് എന്നുള്ളത് മറ്റൊരു സന്തോഷമാണ് എന്ന് പറയാതിരിക്കാൻ നമുക്കില്ല. ബിക്കോസ് in one way or other he is also part of FOSA എന്നുള്ളത് കൊണ്ട് തന്നെ നമ്മുടെ സന്തോഷം വളരെയധികം വർദ്ധിക്കും എന്നുള്ളതാണ്. And another thing is that ഇന്നത്തെ ഒരു ഗസ്റ്റ് സ്പീക്കർ ആയിട്ട് ഈ ഒരു പ്രോഗ്രാമിൽ ജോയിൻ ചെയ്യുക എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞിട്ടുള്ള അഡ്വക്കേറ്റ് പി എ മുഹമ്മദ് റിയാസ് ഈസ് അഗെയിൻ another proud alumnus of Farook College. He is the Minister of Kerala also. എല്ലാ അർത്ഥത്തിലും വളരെയധികം സന്തോഷവും ആഹ്ലാദവും ഒക്കെ മുറ്റി നിൽക്കുന്ന ഈ ഒരു അവസരത്തിൽ ഞാൻ കൂടുതൽ സംസാരിക്കുന്നില്ല. കോളേജിനെ സംബന്ധിച്ചിടത്തോളം കോളേജ് അതിന്റെ 75ാമത്തെ വർഷത്തിലേക്ക് പ്രവേശിക്കുകയാണ്. 2022-23 is the platinum jubilee year, and college is planning and talking about programs for wide celebration of the platinum jubilee. And definitely all the overseas chapters of FOSA can contribute in different ways. You can think of what programs you can take up related to these platinum jubilee celebrations and all that. ഞാൻ എൻ്റെ വാക്കുകൾ ഇനി നീട്ടിക്കൊണ്ടുപോകാൻ ഉദ്ദേശിക്കുന്നില്ല. കുറച്ച് സമയമേ ഉള്ളൂ. നമുക്ക് പ്രോഗ്രാമുകൾ വേഗത്തിൽ കടക്കേണ്ടതുണ്ട്. നിങ്ങൾ സംഘടിപ്പിക്കുന്ന ഈ ഒരു വെബിനാറിനുള്ള എല്ലാ ആശംസകളും സെൻട്രൽ കമ്മിറ്റിയുടെ ജനറൽ സെക്രട്ടറി എന്നുള്ള നിലയിൽ മുഴുവൻ സെൻട്രൽ കമ്മിറ്റിക്ക് വേണ്ടിയിട്ടും ഞാൻ ഞങ്ങളുടെ അഭേദവുമായിട്ടുള്ള നന്ദിയും ആശംസകളൊക്കെ അർപ്പിച്ചുകൊണ്ട് എൻ്റെ വാക്കുകൾ ഉപസംഹരിക്കുന്നു. ജയ് ഹിന്ദ്.
Thank you, Mr. Yousuf, for your beautiful message and for attending this event. Our chapter leader from FOSA Dubai, Mr. Rashid K, would like to share a message as well.
Rashid, you are on mute.
Mic on ചെയ്യാൻ മറന്നുപോയി. അസ്സലാമു അലൈക്കും, നമസ്കാരം. യൂസുഫ് അലി സാർ പറഞ്ഞതുപോലെ ഏറെ സന്തോഷമുണ്ട് ഫോസ കാനഡയുടെ ഈ ഒരു ഇവന്റിന്റെ ഭാഗമായി ഒരു ആശംസ അർപ്പിക്കാനൊരു അവസരം കിട്ടിയതിൽ. അതിലാദ്യമായി ഫോസ കാനഡ പ്രസിഡന്റ് ഹസീനയോട് നന്ദി പറയുകയാണ്. ഹസീന സൂചിപ്പിച്ചതുപോലെ ഫറൂഖ് കോളേജ് എന്നുള്ളൊരു ആ ഒരു പാഷൻ, ആ ഒരു വികാരത്തിന്റെ പേരിൽ ലോകത്തിന്റെ വിവിധ ഭാഗങ്ങളിലെ ആളുകൾ കൂടിച്ചേരുന്ന ഈ ഒരു വലിയ കൂട്ടായ്മ, അത് ലോകത്തിലെ വിവിധ ഭാഗങ്ങളിൽ വിവിധ ചാപ്റ്ററുകളിലായിട്ട് ഒത്തിരി നല്ല കാര്യങ്ങൾ, ഒത്തിരി സമൂഹത്തിന് ഗുണപരമായ കാര്യങ്ങൾ ചെയ്തു. കോളേജിന്റെ ആൽമമാറ്റർ എന്നുള്ള നിലക്കുള്ള പരസ്പരം സഹായിക്കുന്ന രീതിയിൽ മുന്നോട്ട് പോകുമ്പോൾ ഇത്തരത്തിലുള്ള പല ഇനീഷ്യേറ്റീവുകളും ഫോസ കാനഡ ഭാഗത്തുനിന്നുണ്ടാകുന്നുള്ളത് ഫോസ കാനഡ പ്രത്യേകം അഭിനന്ദിക്കുകയാണ്. ഇനിയും ഇത്തരത്തിലുള്ള ഒത്തിരി നല്ല പരിപാടികൾ സംഘടിപ്പിക്കാൻ ഫോസ കാനഡക്ക് സാധിക്കട്ടെ എന്ന് ആശംസിക്കുകയും ചെയ്യുന്നു. അതുകൂടാതെ ഫൗസി പരിപാടി പ്രസന്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നുള്ളത് പേഴ്സണലി വളരെ സന്തോഷമുള്ള ഒരു കാര്യമാണ്. ചുരുങ്ങിയ ദിവസങ്ങളിലാണെങ്കിലും ഹസീനക്കൊക്കെ ഒപ്പം ചെലവഴിക്കാൻ സാധിച്ചതിലുള്ള സന്തോഷം കൂടെ പങ്കുവയ്ക്കുകയാണ്. എന്തായാലും ഫോസ കാനഡയ്ക്കും ഫൗസിനും എല്ലാവിധ ആശംസകളും ദുബായ് ചാപ്റ്ററിന്റെ ഭാഗത്ത് നേർന്നുകൊണ്ട് നന്ദി, നമസ്കാരം.
Thank you for your wonderful message, Mr. Rashid K. Next, I would like to invite our chapter leader from FOSA UK, Mr. Roxy B, to share some words too.
Oh, hi everyone. A very warm good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm very glad to be here, to be invited to this function. As is my old friend, so is Rashid as well. And our teacher Yousuf Ali sir is here. So happy to see all those familiar faces. So on behalf of FOSA UK, so pleased to hear that FOSA Canada is organizing this event. And Fawz is a young talent in chess. I was speaking to Haseena and I could figure out that he has been attending. He started chess quite recently during lockdown time, and he has been doing really, really well. And he has started attending provincial tournaments, which is fantastic, and is a great inspiration to other children, other students, everyone, irrespective of their ages. So it's a great thing to see that one of our friends' son is doing really well in chess. So I hope he will be able to do a wonderful seminar today, and I wish him all the very best. And FOSA Canada, come up. It's quite inspiring that you guys are doing this program, and I wish you all the very best for future programs. And once again, all the very best from FOSA UK. Thank you.
We appreciate your participation in this event, and Thank you for your message. Next, I would like to invite our chapter leader from FOSA USA, Mr. KunjuMohammed, who also has a message to share with us all.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this program, all. So I'm very delighted to be here representing FOSA US. And I wish to congratulate Fawz for taking time to conducting this program. And also my best wishes to Canada for conducting this program. And Canada chapter, I hope you will be conducting more and more programs. And we all will come and join hands to you to make more programs and benefit the community of FOSA. And also, I wish to thank all the viewers who are taking time to attend this program. And Fawz is an upcoming talent in chess. And you know, chess is a wonderful game. It traveled all the way from Indian subcontinent to everywhere across. And we are in Canada now, listening a young talent giving us some lecture or what kind of a webinar on chess. And we are very delighted to watch and listen first. And FOSA US is a very new induction to the FOSA community, and we hope more and more members will join and strengthen this community. And I wish all the best to Fawz and Canadian FOSA members. And thank you for inviting me, and I wish all the best. Let's listen, Fawz. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your beautiful message, Mr. KunjuMohammed. Next, we would like to present a recorded message from our Honorable Minister of Public Works Department and Tourism, Mr. P.A. Mohammed Riyaz, who is also an esteemed FOSA member and an exceptional chess player as well.
Farook കോളേജ് ഓൾഡ് സ്റ്റുഡൻസ് അസോസിയേഷൻ കാനഡ ചാപ്റ്ററിൻ്റെ നേതൃത്വത്തിലുള്ള ഈ പരിപാടി അതേറെ സന്തോഷകരമാണ്. പല കാരണത്താൽ. ഒന്ന്, ഞാനും ഒരു ഫാറൂഖ് കോളേജിൽ പഠിച്ച വിദ്യാർത്ഥിയായിരുന്നു. രണ്ട്, എനിക്കും ചെസ്സിനോട് വലിയ താല്പര്യമാണുള്ളത്. അപ്പോൾ ഇവിടെ തീർച്ചയായും ഒരു പൂർവ്വ വിദ്യാർത്ഥി എന്നുള്ള നിലയിൽ ഫാറൂഖ് കോളേജിലെ പൂർവ്വ വിദ്യാർത്ഥികളുടെ ഒരു കൂട്ടായ്മയിൽ പങ്കുകൊള്ളാൻ സാധിച്ചതിൽ, അതും മറ്റൊരു രാജ്യത്ത്, ഏറെ ദൂരെയുള്ള കാനഡ എന്ന് പറയുന്ന രാജ്യത്ത് നിങ്ങൾക്കൊപ്പം പങ്കുകൊള്ളാൻ സാധിച്ചതിൻ്റെ സന്തോഷം പ്രത്യേകം അറിയിക്കുകയാണ്. ചെസ്സ് തീർച്ചയായും ഏറെ പ്രോത്സാഹിപ്പിക്കുകയും വളർത്തുകയും ചെയ്യേണ്ട ഒന്നാണെന്ന കാര്യത്തിൽ ആർക്കും സംശയമില്ല. ചെസ് കേവലം നമുക്കൊരു സ്പോർട്സ് മാത്രമായി എടുക്കേണ്ടതല്ല, അതൊരു കളി മാത്രമല്ല. ക്ഷമ, അതുപോലെ തന്നെ കൃത്യമായ തുടർ നടപടി തുടങ്ങി നിരവധി കാര്യങ്ങൾ ചെസ്സിലൂടെ നാം അറിയാതെ നമുക്ക് ആർജിക്കുവാനാകും. ദീർഘവീക്ഷണം അത് തീർച്ചയായും വികസിപ്പിക്കുവാൻ നമുക്കിതിലൂടെ സാധിക്കും. അങ്ങനെ ചെസ്സിൻ്റെ ഒരുപാട് ഗുണങ്ങളുണ്ട്. യഥാർത്ഥത്തിൽ ഇത് ചെറുപ്രായത്തിൽ തന്നെ കുട്ടികളിൽ നിർബന്ധിതമാക്കേണ്ട ഒന്നാണെന്നാണ് എൻ്റെ വ്യക്തിപരമായ അഭിപ്രായം. തീർച്ചയായും ഫാറൂഖ് കോളേജ് ഓൾഡ് സ്റ്റുഡൻസ് അസോസിയേഷൻ കാനഡയിലും ഒത്തുകൂടുന്നു എന്നുള്ളതിൽ സന്തോഷമുണ്ട്. നിങ്ങളുടെ സന്തോഷത്തിൽ ഒരു പൂർവ്വ വിദ്യാർത്ഥി എന്നുള്ള നിലയിലും ഞാൻ പങ്കുകൊള്ളുന്നു. ഈ വെബിനാർ തീർച്ചയായിട്ടും എല്ലാ നിലയിലും നിങ്ങൾക്ക് ഉപയോഗപ്രദമാകും എന്ന് കരുതുന്നു. എൻ്റെ സ്നേഹാശംസകൾ.
Sorry for the interruption. We'll run the minister's message one more time.
ഫാറൂഖ് കോളേജ് ഓൾഡ് സ്റ്റുഡൻസ് അസോസിയേഷൻ കാനഡ ചാപ്റ്ററിൻ്റെ നേതൃത്വത്തിലുള്ള ഈ പരിപാടി അതേറെ സന്തോഷകരമാണ്. പല കാരണത്താൽ. ഒന്ന്, ഞാനും ഒരു ഫാറൂഖ് കോളേജിൽ പഠിച്ച വിദ്യാർത്ഥിയായിരുന്നു. രണ്ട്, എനിക്കും ചെസ്സിനോട് വലിയ താല്പര്യമാണുള്ളത്. അപ്പോൾ ഇവിടെ തീർച്ചയായും ഒരു പൂർവ്വ വിദ്യാർത്ഥി എന്നുള്ള നിലയിൽ ഫാറൂഖ് കോളേജിലെ പൂർവ്വ വിദ്യാർത്ഥികളുടെ ഒരു കൂട്ടായ്മയിൽ പങ്കുകൊള്ളാൻ സാധിച്ചതിൽ, അതും മറ്റൊരു രാജ്യത്ത്, ഏറെ ദൂരെയുള്ള കാനഡ എന്ന് പറയുന്ന രാജ്യത്ത് നിങ്ങൾക്കൊപ്പം പങ്കുകൊള്ളാൻ സാധിച്ചതിൻ്റെ സന്തോഷം പ്രത്യേകം അറിയിക്കുകയാണ്. ചെസ്സ് തീർച്ചയായും ഏറെ പ്രോത്സാഹിപ്പിക്കുകയും വളർത്തുകയും ചെയ്യേണ്ട ഒന്നാണെന്ന കാര്യത്തിൽ ആർക്കും സംശയമില്ല. ചെസ് കേവലം നമുക്കൊരു സ്പോർട്സ് മാത്രമായി എടുക്കേണ്ടതല്ല, അതൊരു കളി മാത്രമല്ല. ക്ഷമ, അതുപോലെ തന്നെ കൃത്യമായ തുടർ നടപടി തുടങ്ങി നിരവധി കാര്യങ്ങൾ ചെസ്സിലൂടെ നാം അറിയാതെ നമുക്ക് ആർജിക്കുവാനാകും. ദീർഘവീക്ഷണം അത് തീർച്ചയായും വികസിപ്പിക്കുവാൻ നമുക്കിതിലൂടെ സാധിക്കും. അങ്ങനെ ചെസ്സിൻ്റെ ഒരുപാട് ഗുണങ്ങളുണ്ട്. യഥാർത്ഥത്തിൽ ഇത് ചെറുപ്രായത്തിൽ തന്നെ കുട്ടികളിൽ നിർബന്ധിതമാക്കേണ്ട ഒന്നാണെന്നാണ് എൻ്റെ വ്യക്തിപരമായ അഭിപ്രായം. തീർച്ചയായും ഫാറൂഖ് കോളേജ് ഓൾഡ് സ്റ്റുഡൻസ് അസോസിയേഷൻ കാനഡയിലും ഒത്തുകൂടുന്നു എന്നുള്ളതിൽ സന്തോഷമുണ്ട്. നിങ്ങളുടെ സന്തോഷത്തിൽ ഒരു പൂർവ്വ വിദ്യാർത്ഥി എന്നുള്ള നിലയിലും ഞാൻ പങ്കുകൊള്ളുന്നു. ഈ വെബിനാർ തീർച്ചയായിട്ടും എല്ലാ നിലയിലും നിങ്ങൾക്ക് ഉപയോഗപ്രദമാകും എന്ന് കരുതുന്നു. എൻ്റെ സ്നേഹാശംസകൾ.
A huge thank you to our chapter leaders and the minister for their inspirational words and participation in this event. Next, I would like to invite Fawz and Mehfil to educate us about chess strategies and tactics. But first, who is Fawz? Fawz is a high school student, also the great-grandson of the late Maulana Abu Sabah Ahmed Ali, who was the founder of Farook College. He's a skilled chess player who has participated in several board tournaments. In fact, he won second place in one of the most recent provincial tournaments. Without delay, it is my pleasure to present Mehfil Mehfil to begin the webinar.
Hello everyone, thank you Neha for the introduction. My name is Fawz Mehfil. I'm a high school student and I first learned to play chess many years ago. I returned back to the game in November of 2020 when it hit its first online boom after being further popularized by TV shows, streamers, YouTube channels, and any other online media that you could imagine. Chess became very popular in the middle of quarantine after The Queen's Gambit by Netflix was released. After that, so much popularity and attention has been garnered and gained on it, and I decided to ride this wave and try and get as good as I can in the game as possible. I've been very interested in it, and I'd like to share a lot of different concepts and ideas with you today. But since I started playing, I've played many online and over-the-board tournaments, read multiple books on the subject at hand, and spent time being coached to improve my game. Today, I'm going to be going over tactics, strategy, and other useful concepts and ideas you can use in your play throughout all three stages of the game: the opening, middle game, and end game. We're going to touch base on everything. Lastly, we're going to look into some bits of the end game as well. Now, before we get into the actual main portion of today, I'm just going to take a brief minute to talk about chess and the very basics of it. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to discuss from the board. Here we are. Chess begins every time on an 8x8 board, as you see here. There's two sides, and each side takes 16 pieces. There's 8 pawns on each side, and they shield the rooks, which go on the side, these pieces right here, the knights, which sit right next to them, the bishops, which land on these files right here, and lastly, the king and the queen. You will finish the game with a win, loss, or draw every single time. And you'll see as the game unfolds, white starts, black follows, and the game will continue as so. Pieces will get traded off, some will be sacrificed, and in the end, only one player can be victorious. In this example, the white player has checkmated the black king, and he leaves victorious. Starting off with the pawn, we're going to look into every single piece and go into detail. The pawn can move up 1 square. However, at the very start of the game, if you haven't moved any of them before, you can move it up 2 squares as so. When pawns capture other pieces, they take diagonally and cannot take forwards. Rooks can only move in horizontals and vertical lines. So if we were to take a look at that, rooks can move up and also to the side. Next up would be the bishops, which can only move in diagonals respective to their color. For example, the light square bishop can only stay on a light square diagonal. Both players have a light square bishop and a dark square bishop. Next up would be the knight, which moves in an L shape. It can jump over pieces and is the only piece that can move in an L shape as so. Lastly would be the queen. The queen can move in a diagonal and also in vertical and horizontal lines. You can think of it as a mix of the rooks and the bishops. Now that we've got a very quick review in, we're going to look at the start of the chess game and principles into how to play it in the best way. In the opening stages of the game, there are three main principles that you should focus on. The biggest one is controlling the center. After that is developing your pieces. And lastly, getting your king tucked away safely. Now, we're going to look at the first thing I mentioned here, which is taking control of the center of the board, meaning these four squares right here. For advanced beginners, that could mean these squares as well. The best way to do this is by pushing pawns into the center of the board. If I were to play the move pawn to e4, I'm taking control of the d5 square and also the f5 square. This restricts my opponent's movement, and this is well regarded as the best first move. Now, for instructional purposes, I'm just going to play this knight back and forth for black, and we're going to make the most optimal setup possible with the white pieces. So I'm going to ask you to just ignore what black is doing for now, and we're going to focus on white's development and how you can make a proper plan in the opening. After pawn to e4, taking control of the center as mentioned, and also opening lines for our bishop and our queen, our next move should be focusing on once again controlling the center. Now, if black has not done anything to restrict our movement, we should always look to place another pawn in the center, which once again restricts our opponent's pieces. As you can see here, we are now controlling 4 central squares, and black is not controlling any. c5 you could debate, but that too, it is a knight that's doing it, so it doesn't really count. Black is repeating this plan, just playing goofy moves, it doesn't really count. We play knight to f3. Now the point of this move is that we are once again controlling the center and also this flank pawn square, so black can no longer play this. Now this knight is on a very active square on f3, opposed to h3, which is the other development option we have for it. Developing a knight on the rim is usually frowned upon, and the reason for this is that it simply does not control as much squares and it's not as active. In the opening stages of the game, you should almost always focus on developing your knight on g1 to f3. And the point of this, once again, is to defend this pawn, to attack the center, and also support this flank pawn square right here. Black is continuing with their plan, which makes no sense, and we continue with ours, which is developing our other knight into the center of the board. As black continues, we can see that now we're controlling many squares on the board. Whether it be the center, the flank, we're really just taking advantage of every single bit of space that we can, and we can see how our lines are opening up for our pieces in many different ways. We're now going to develop our bishops. The bishops come before knights after knights because the knights usually have a very simple development plan. They always go towards the center of the board. However, bishops have multiple squares that they can go to. Now, the bishop on f1, the light square bishop, can go to e2, d3, c4, and b5 typically. In this case, I chose bishop to c4. And the reason for this is that it's attacking a weak pawn right here on f7, and it also has a lot of space to move around on this diagonal that is very active. We do the exact same thing for the dark square bishop, and now you can already see how much space we've taken up with our pieces, whether it be with the knights or the pawns. White already has a significant advantage of space because of how much activity our pieces have. Now our next step is tucking our king away safely. Now that we've developed all of our minor pieces, our king is very important to get safe and away from any danger. While the king is in the center, it's prone to any attack. And if you're not careful, black can castle, get their rook right here, and start delivering checkmate if possible. Now, how do we avoid this? The goal is to get our king castled. And the way this works is that if your king has not been moved and your rook has not been moved either, you can tuck your king away safely by moving it over 2 steps. In this process, the rook also comes over 2 steps, and we call this process castling. Now, with castling, if you were to just drag it in an online game, this will do it for you. But I'd like you to remember the process in case you're going to be playing over the board. Now, our king is a lot safer on g1 as opposed to e1. The point of this is our king is no longer in the center, which can be prone to lots of attacks. And here on g1, it's being defended by the rook, also the knight which defends the square, and the bishop. our king is very safe, and we have an extremely optimal position as opposed to black, who has done absolutely nothing. There are two more steps I'd like to mention briefly. You can bring your queen up one square and then connect to the works as well. And here we've reached a position in which white is completely winning, even though there might not be any clear way to do so. Now, why is this? It's simply because of the activity of the pieces. If I were to turn on the engine here, it's giving an extreme advantage for white, a sense that we are just completely dominating here. And this is really what you want in a chess game. This right here is called a golden setup. And that is because of the activity, the lines for our pieces, and how active we are, how many squares we're controlling as opposed to our opponent. And how did we achieve this setup? We just followed the 3 rules. 1, control the center. 2, develop your pieces. And lastly, get your king tucked away safely. If you follow these rules, you will almost always come out of the opening with a comfortable or better position. Especially as a beginner, a lot of people don't follow this strategy or principle, and you can take an advantage very easily. We're going to look into openings in more detail. The issue here is that we looked at a setup where black did not refute at all. Now, what's most likely going to happen after we play e4 taking control of the center, black will respond with pawn to e5. Now, the point is, they're doing the exact same thing we are. They're controlling the central pieces on our side of the board, and they're also opening up lines for themselves. You're not going to get an easy game where black is always just going to play knight to a6 and back. They are going to fight back, and that's what you really need to prepare for. In this position, we can no longer put another pawn in the center. Why is this? If we were to do this, black will simply take our pawn. Now, you might be asking, why can't I just take back? Well, there's a big problem here. Black can attack our queen really easily, and they're developing pieces with tempo. Now, what's the issue with that? I thought you said we should develop our pieces. We should develop our pieces, but our minor pieces, and not the queen, which is very prone to danger and attacks. If I were to bring out my queen this early, black can relentlessly attack it on and on. Now, our queen already has barely any squares that it can go to. If we were to go here, it can be captured by the knight and the bishop. You really don't want to mess around here with your queen in the opening. It's better to keep it safe and take it out only when absolutely necessary. Therefore, b4 cannot be played. We can't place another pawn in the center, so we focus on our next step of the plan. If you were to look at the ideas that we just looked at in the previous game, you'd notice that knight f3 is the next move that we play. Now, in the last game, we were just focusing on controlling the center. But now that there's a pawn here that's very weak because it's not defended by anything, knight f3 not only develops a piece, but it also attacks a central pawn, which is very weak. Now, since we're playing the white pieces, we should always look for initiative in the opening. Since we're the one with the first move, we should always look to attack. In this case, we're developing a piece with tempo. Black is now put into a defensive position immediately, and they need to do something about this. Black plays the best move, which is knight to c6, defending the pawn with their knight and also developing a piece. From this position onwards, there's multiple moves we can play. You might be thinking about knight to c3. This is a great move, and it's also one that I'd recommend you go for. But a lot of people in this position will play bishop to c4, which I think is the best move in the position. This opening has a name, and it's widely regarded as the Italian game, and it's the most popular opening in chess history. After bishop to c4, black will most often play knight to f6, which is attacking our pawn. From here, we can defend with d3, which is not only opening up lines for a bishop, but also just defending the pawn. From there on out, black will most likely play bishop to c5, which is developing their piece as we did ours. After we castle and get our king safely, black will most probably play d6, which is opening up lines for the bishop. The game continues as so, and you can see both players developing their pieces naturally and normally. This is a position that you can reach after exactly 10 moves. This is very common, and it shows both sides showing an understanding of the chess opening. Now, as the beginner, you will most likely never face this position, and you will never get brought into a point where your opponent will be playing accurately all the way through. And this is how you take advantage. Since you know the ideas of the opening and how to deliver your pieces into active squares and get them into the right positions, you will already be at an advantage. From there, you convert from the middle game into the endgame and eventually checkmate your opponent, either through a positional or material advantage. Now, we looked at both an optimal setup for black and also a really poor setup for black. But there's lots of cases where you can actually utilize how your pieces are developed. For example, if black were to play e5 in this position, you played knight f3, and black brings out their queen early, we did not discuss this position, but what can we do now that the queen is here? Well, our knight being developed in f3 is attacking two squares, and you'll notice that the queen is hanging. And this is the reason why we developed the knight here, because it's doing a lot more than it does on g1, you're getting closer to castling, and now since our opponent brought their queen early, we can just take it. And that further shows the advantage of developing your pieces in this way towards the center, and also the disadvantage of bringing out your queen this early. That's really it for the... It's very principle-based, and I don't think you need to go around learning different positional and setup-based openings. It's very easy to play chess in the opening by just following those three principles, and I'd recommend you write them down, understand them further, and you can find a lot of information on this online as well. Strategy starts in the opening, and it's very important to take note of. Next, we're going to move on to tactics. Anatoly Karpov, former world champion, widely regarded as one of the greatest players of all time, stated that chess is 99% tactics. Now, what exactly is a tactic? A tactic is a forcing move or sequence of them that guarantees a gain of material or checkmate. Here's probably the simplest tactic there is in all of chess. It's an extremely common position in which white wins the game in just 3 moves. Now, before you think about what the winning move is here, there's a checklist that you should go through in every single move of the game. When you think about your chess move, even when you're certain of what you want to play, you should always think, do I have any checks, captures, or attacks in that exact order? In this case, let's take a look at it. Do we have any checks in this position? We do. We have bishop takes f7 check, and we also have queen takes f7 check. Do we have any captures in this position? We do. Those exact 2 moves just mentioned, queen takes f7 and bishop takes f7. Lastly, do we have any attacks? Yep, we can attack the king with those 2 moves just mentioned. Now that we have our list, which is just those 2 moves, we can start narrowing it down and seeing which one is most optimal. If we were to take with the bishop, what is black going to do? Well, black has 2 moves that they can go to. They can go to e7 and f8. Now, this is not most optimal for us, even though it does win a pawn, because black is escaping. However, if we were to take with the queen, we are not only checking black, but black has no squares which they can go to. If you remember, the queen covers these 2 squares because it can move like a bishop and a rook, and it's also being defended by the bishop on c4. Therefore, the king is in checkmate because he simply has nowhere to go. Queen takes f7 is the move, and this wins the game on the spot. This is how you should be looking at tactics. How can I play a move that is forcing black? How can I play a move that is either a check, a capture, or an attack that is going to win the game for me or gain material? Let's take a look at another simple tactic. This one's very simple as it's another made-in-one puzzle. Are there any checks in this position? Yep, there's check right here, check right here. I could take this pawn, that's a check. I can go here, that's a check. And I think that's about it. Now, do we have any attacks? Or sorry, I should look at captures first. Do we have any captures? This right here is a capture. Do we have any attacks in this position? I can attack the queen. Let's see, what else can we do? We can attack the rook. We're already attacking it. That's also another capture we can look at. And that's it, really. These are our list of moves. So we have taking the rook, putting the bishop on e3, putting the queen on e4, and also taking this pawn on b5. Now we can narrow down and see which one is best. Taking the rook is good, but this is not going to force the black king into checkmate or a position where we're winning very easily. We're destroying the queen away from the center, and also the black king is in a position where it's very vulnerable, and we should try to exploit this. Therefore, this is not an option to us. Next up, queen to e4. Is this good? Well, the black king starts escaping, and we don't want that. We want to checkmate him as soon as possible. So this is not an option either. Next up, we have knight takes b5 check. This is a check and a capture, but is it good? Absolutely not, because black will simply recapture and now you've lost a piece for no reason. Our last move that we can look at is our last two moves is queen to e3 and bishop to e3. Queen to e3 is a move, and this will win on the spot. Another move is bishop to e3, which will also win on the spot. Now, these are the two moves that are the best because they deliver checkmate immediately. Bishop to e3, defended by the queen, restricts all the black's king squares, and you win the game immediately because he's in check and checkmate as he has nowhere to go. Our last tactic we're going to look at before we get into more intermediate ideas is this one right here. Now, there's a bit of a story here. This is an opening called the Stafford Gambit, and it's become very popular online recently by a YouTuber named Eric Rosen. This is a trap that he discussed, and it's very common. I actually got to play this in a rated game once over a year ago, and I haven't stopped talking about it since because of how interesting it is. Here's a position that arises after 5 moves in the Stafford Gambit. Black to move here. Black plays bishop to c5, as we discussed. Getting a piece out, our bishop is on an active square, just as we mentioned in the demo. And here is pressuring the f2 square that is only defended by the king. Black makes a grave mistake, bishop to g5. Now, the consequences of this aren't immediately seen, but we have an insane tactic here, which is knight takes e4. Now, the point is, if black were to take with the pawn, we have this really wild line where we can win the queen. We can sacrifice the bishop, and if they were to take, we take the queen. If they're to move up instead, we can force them to take with this, and then grab the queen after that. So you might be thinking, all right, that's no problem. I just won't take the knight. I'm going to take the queen instead. Now here is where the tactic starts, and one of the most interesting lines or forced checkmate sequences that I could find. And this is something that's very common, believe it or not. I love this so much, and I'd like you to really just take a second here and try to find the sequence of moves or the tactic that wins for the black pieces. I'll give you a minute. All right, so we're going to take a look at the checks, captures, and attacks in this position. Do we have any checks? Bishop takes f7, f2 is a check. Do we have any captures? Knight takes f2, bishop takes f2, both of them are captures. Do we have any attacks? We can attack the queen. And also another capture that I should mention is taking the bishop. Let's narrow it down now. Taking the bishop? Nah, off the list. Point is, we're already down a queen. Now we need to find a way to checkmate white, or else we're going to be left in an extremely disadvantageous position. Next up would be attacking the queen. This is absolutely useless because white can simply capture a bishop, and we're left with an extremely poor position. White is definitely going to end up winning this. That's off the chart as well. Knight takes f7. This is a good move that attacks both the queen and the rook, but it's not good enough, and we need to find something more forcing. So we look at the only check, which is bishop takes f7. In this position, it's defended by the knight. The knight covers the d2 square, and black only has king e2 as their only option. Let's roll with that. Now, in this position, there is a winning move for black that wins on the spot. It's going to be checkmate, and you once again just have to look at the checks to find it. What checks do we have here? There's only one, bishop to g4, which delivers checkmate on the spot. You can see here that all the squares around the white king are defended by our pieces, and this wins for us. All three of these were very simple checkmate puzzles, and a lot of them could actually be incorporated into your games. This one especially is very common. If we look at the Lichess database, this position has been reached over 7,000 times. Now we're going to get into the main part of today, which is advanced tactics, which you'll really be seeing a lot in your games. I'd say if you were to play around 100 chess games, all three of the tactics that I'm going to discuss today after this one, extremely prevalent and relevant in today's chess world. Now I'm going to go into Lichess's practice section, and we're going to go over these. The first tactic we're going to talk about is the pin. All right. This right here. Now, the pin is a tactic that you can use in all three stages of the chess game. Now, you can do it by attacking the other player's forces in a way that allows you to explore a much greater vulnerability if the attack piece moves. Usually, the pin piece blocks an attack to a more valuable piece, but it could also protect a key defender of the position or even impede a checkmate. In this case, we have an opportunity to make a pin on the knight. Now, if we were to play bishop to e4, we'd be pinning the knight to the king. What does this mean? The knight can no longer move, because if so, we would be taking the king. Now, that is obviously illegal, which is why this is called an absolute pin, in which it is an illegal move to move the pin piece. Bishop to d4 here wins, as black would have to move, and we can capture the knight right after. That was a very simple one. Now we have one that can happen in a real game. This one looks very realistic to me, in which white has 6 pawns, black has 5, but black has the advantage here because he has the rook and we have a bishop. But there's a way that white can get a very advantageous position here, and it's through another absolute pin. Here, white can play bishop to a3, which pins the rook to the king. Now, the rook can no longer move or be defended, because if so, we would simply take the king. We play bishop to a3, black moves anything really, we grab the rook, and we take a position where we're up a piece for no compensation. Now we're going to look at relative pins. Relative pins are different from absolute pins because the pin piece can still move. Now the issue is, if the pin piece moves, we're going to take a piece of greater value. Here's an example where we see the rook and the queen are lined up. We have a dark square bishop that can exploit this. If we were to play bishop to c3, this piece right here, the rook, is pinned to the queen. It can no longer move because we take the queen, so black moves the queen instead. We're just going to take another look at that. This right here. Now in this position is exploiting the pin. This is an absolute pin, as we can see, because the knight is pinned to the king. If the knight were to move, we would take the king, which is illegal, so that is not allowed. How can we exploit this pin and utilize this? Well, we can't simply take the knight with the rook, because black recaptures and we end up in an equal position. Now this position is better for white because we have a rook over black's knight, and that is a stronger piece. But how can we exploit this, use this pin to gain this knight or obtain it? We can play pawn to f4. And what this does is the knight cannot move because we would take the king in this position. So black instead just moves the king and retreats the knight. Here's another example where we can exploit the pin. We're going to use the checklist here once again. Are there any checks, captures, attacks we can do in this position? We have queen takes g7 check, but black simply takes, so that's not an option for us. That's also a capture. Queen takes g7, but black recaptures. That's not good. Now, another capture we have is bishop takes f6. Now, you might be thinking this is not good because black can recapture, but really think about it. Can black recapture the bishop in that position? No, he cannot, because if we were to take the knight, this pawn right here is pinned to the king in an absolute pin. If the knight were to take diagonally, we would take the pin, which we discussed is of course illegal. Now, what does this mean for us? We can take the knight for free. Here's another example. This one is a lot more advanced, so I really want you to think about it. Are there any checks, captures, or attacks we can do here? One capture and check is just taking the knight. However, black just recaptures, and after some trades, we're left in a worse position. We have knight takes g5, which is a capture. Now, let's really look at this. If black were to capture with the knight, what would we do? We would take the rook right here, and black we would take the rook. We're simply going to take the rook because after black recaptures with the knight, we can take the rook right here. And this is how you really want to look at tactics, is every single move that black is going to play. Once you play a move, think how is your opponent going to respond? So we're going to take the pawn right here. We see that we're absolutely just going to leave with a winning position. Here's the second last tactic we're going to look at under the pin. This right here, we're going to look at all the pins in the position. This pawn right here is pinned to the king. If it were to take diagonally, we would take the king, which, as we discussed, is illegal. So this pawn has an absolute pin on the king. How are we going to go about this? Well, we can just take this pawn, because if it were to be taken, black cannot recapture. Now, is there any piece here that can take the pawn? There is. The queen on c2 can take this pawn. Now, this might look like absolutely wild to you, because when would you ever take a pawn that can be recaptured? But that's when you really just have to look at the pin and utilize it. And that's why the bishop on d5 is so powerful in this position. It's the holding piece, and we can simply capture this pawn. Black is retreated with the bishop, and we can actually finish with checkmate because the bishop is attacking the square. So is the queen. We take, the black king has no squares, and we leave victorious. Here's the last position, and also the hardest puzzle, in which we use 2 different tactics to win the queen and also the game. How do we go about this? Let's look at our checks, captures, and attacks. Do we have any checks? We do. Rook takes h3 is a check. Now, does rook 8 takes h3 win on the spot? No, but it does give us a very advantageous position. If we were to take the pawn here, black can't recapture. Why can't black recapture? Because there is an unleashed pin on the king that is released with their queen. If we were to take the pawn right here, black can't recapture because we would take the king in an absolute pin. This pin is not active right now because the black rook is currently shielding the queen from our attack or from our pin. But after we move it in this check, black is forced to move to the left instead of actually taking it. So we're going to roll with that, take our pawn, and now we're going to utilize another pin in this position to win the queen. How are we going to do this? Let's look at the new pins. Now, this queen is no longer pinned to the king because the king has moved. So our queen is currently hanging. Do we have to move the queen? Let's look at our forcing moves first, the checklist. Checks, captures, and attacks. Do we have any checks? We do. Bishop takes f2 is a check. Is this good? It isn't, because after black recaptures, our rook is hanging and our queen is hanging. Do we have any attacks here? Well, we can attack the knight up here, and we can also maybe swing our queen by down here, which attacks it. Neither of these moves are good because they're just not forcing enough, and we need to get some compensation here to win this game. Lastly, do we have any captures? We looked at captures. Do we have any checks? We looked at that. Do we have any attacks? There's one more attack that we can look at. First, we can look at the pins in this position. This pawn right here is pinned to the king in an absolute pin. Since the king moved back to G1, this pawn can't capture diagonally because we would take the king in its absolute pin. How can we utilize this? We can actually attack the queen right here because it can no longer be captured. Therefore, the queen has to take. We're going to take back with the pawn, and we leave the game victorious as we've won the queen. Now, hopefully this one wasn't too complicated for you. This is a much more advanced tactic, and the progression here is pretty crazy. If you want to look more into this, you can find it under puzzles in Lee chess. There is one more tactic that I want to discuss after the pin that is very common, and it's called the skewer, and it borrows similar concepts. A skewer in chess is one of the most basic tactics. To use a skewer, you attack a file or a diagonal where your opponent's pieces are lined up. In a skewer, the most valuable piece is attacked first, so it must move and make way for you to take the less valuable piece behind it. Here's an example of a skewer. You see the queen and the rook lined up as so. How can we exploit this? Well, we can drop our bishop right here to f3, where it'll be attacking the queen. Once it moves away, we can grab the rook. Let's go ahead and do that. That's an example of a very simple relative skewer. Now, how can we exploit a skewer right here? Well, we see the queen and the rook lined up. If we were to just take the queen, the rook would recapture. So do we have any better moves? We can actually attack the queen with the rook, and once it moves away, we can capture the rook. Once black recaptures, we take again with the queen, and we win the game as we've gained the rook, and we also end it in checkmate. Let's go ahead and do that. Instead of black going for checkmate, they're going to play the best move, which is just to sacrifice the queen. We're not going to take back with the queen because after black recaptures, we end up in an equal position. Instead, we take with the bishop, move our queen away, and we eventually win the game. What is our tactic here? Well, let's look at how white's pieces are lined up. You can see the rook is over here, the bishop's over here, the queen's over here, the rook is over here. How can we exploit these pieces? Well, there's no way to exploit this rook. It's pretty safe, so we're just going to take that off the board. This bishop is really just defending the rook. So if we were to exterminate this, we would probably be able to get our bishop very active on this diagonal. How can we do that? Well, if we take this bishop with the rook, even though we're giving up our rook for a bishop, after the queen recaptures, we can pop our bishop right here and skewer the queen and the rook. That works for us. We're going to take the bishop. After the queen recaptures, we're going to play bishop to c6 and skewer the queen and the rook in a relative skewer. Once the queen moves away, we grab the rook for free, and we win up a rook. Now we're going to look at absolute skewers. Similar to relative pins and absolute pins, an absolute skewer is a skewer in which the king is placed in front of the relative piece. And the point is, once you skewer it, it just has to move. It doesn't have a choice. If you were to just check the king is forced to move, and then you take the piece behind it. So that's really a difference between absolute and relative tactics. Is absolute tactics, you don't have a choice. Here in this position, we're going to play bishop to d5, which forces the king away, and then we grab the queen. The bishop is defended by the queen, in case you didn't notice. Here's another absolute skewer. Now, what is the move that we can play here? Well, we see the king and the queen lined up. We can play bishop to e5, which wins the queen, but not on the spot. After we play bishop to e5, black can simply capture the queen, the bishop. What do we do from here? Well, here we have another tactic in which is a check. We can go drop our queen right here to c3, in which we attack the king, and the queen is right behind it. We skewer the pieces and grab the queen right after. So we have to sacrifice a bishop in the process, but we win a queen. Here's another absolute skewer that we can look at. In this position, we can actually win a pawn and leave with an advantageous position because we're going to be left with a rook and a bishop. In positions where you're up material, you can actually look to trade down pieces of equal value, and that will eventually get you to a simplified position in which you can win. This is an important concept in endgames. If you're up a rook, your opponent has two bishops, two knights, you have two knights and two bishops, you can often trade off the bishops and the knights, and you end up in a position where you're simply up a rook and it's very easy to convert. Here's an example of that. We want to get these queens traded off, especially since our queen is not as active. Now, there's a tactic here that's very interesting. We can actually sacrifice this queen just for a pawn. What's the point? After we take the pawn and black recaptures, we can pop our rook in right here. It is an absolute pin of both the king and the queen. Once the king pops away, we grab the queen for free. This way, we gain back our piece, and we leave with an advantageous simplified position. Here's our second last absolute skewer. This one is a lot more complicated. It's a 3-move sequence in which we can win the queen. Now, we see the queen and the king are both on dark squares. Is there any way we can exploit this? There sure is. We can pop our queen right here, deliver a check, and once the king moves away, we're going to pop our queen into g7. And the point is, after the king captures the knight, we're going to put our queen right here, which skewers the king and the rook, and the queen, sorry. Black really has no other option. They can move here, but in that case, we're just going to deliver checkmate because we can pop our queen in right here, and there's a further force sequence that we can look at. But black's best option really is to take the knight after that. So we're going to play queen to g7 check, and after black takes their knight, we're going to play queen to f8. Black takes this pawn right here, and we're going to grab the queen for free. That's a 3-move sequence for an absolute skewer. Here's our last absolute skewer we can look at. This one might be the most difficult to see, but it's a way that we can win the queen. We can look at this lineup right here for the bishop. Is there any way that we can get the queen on this square so we can exploit this absolute pin? There sure is. If we were to play rook to a8, black would be forced to take, and after that, we can pop our bishop into here and take the queen right after. Let's go ahead and do that. Rook to a8, queen captures, and followed by bishop to f3 check, and after that, we grab the queen. That right here, there really is a look at the two most common tactics there are in chess, the skewer and the pin, and you'll see these very often in games. Hopefully nothing was too confusing. Once again, you can look at much simpler puzzles on Lead Chess. If you go into the puzzles section, you can go to puzzle themes, And you can search for both of these two, the skewer, and you can go into the easiest section right here and find puzzles that might be a little less complicated than what you were looking for. Now, the last part of today I'm going to talk about is a bit of stuff in endgames. The endgame is very important to study, and a lot of people ignore it because a lot of people's games simply just don't go to the endgame. People like studying openings instead because all games start in the opening. Now, the thing is, endgame study is extremely important because you don't want to end up in an endgame where you just have no idea what to do. So we're going to look at very simple piece checkmates that happen extremely often. These have probably happened hundreds of times for me, and knowing them is extremely useful. The first piece checkmate we're going to look at is the most simple there is in all of chess, which is the queen and rook mate. Well, the queen and queen mate could be debatably more simple, but this is really as easy as it gets. In this position, black is left with just a king, and white has a queen and a rook to use, and also a king for the checkmate, but we won't need it. Now, how can we win this game? Well, there's actually a 3-move sequence that wins on the spot here. Now, we're going to look at a concept called the ladder checkmate. Ladder checkmating is where you just forcefully push the king to the side of the board and eventually deliver a checkmate. We do this with 2 pieces, kind of like a ladder system, where we just climb and climb and climb until the king is eventually at the edge. Now, in this position, there's a way that we can force the king to the back rank. This right here. How can we do this? We're going to start with the rook. If we put our rook right here on h5, we cut off this entire space from the king. The king can no longer go here because the rook is covering all these squares. Now, if we don't go there, we instead play like this, the king is just going to start moving and marching this way. It's going to escape, and it's just going to take us longer to checkmate. Instead of that, we're going to restrict its pieces, sorry, not its pieces, but its movement, its mobility. We're going to play rook to a5, cutting off all these squares from the king. Now what we're going to do is further restrict the lines for the king. What more rows can we take off? Well, the king is currently on the 6th row right now. How can we get it off here? How can we push it more to the back? Well, you might be thinking we can use the same concept, which is just rook to h6. But the problem is, if we play rook to h6, the king starts crawling back this way. Why is that? We no longer have this restrictor right here. We want to leave the rook as it is, and we're going to use our second piece, the queen, bring it up all the way, and force the king back. Now we have both these lines cut off for the king. We can move the rook once again, so we can cut off the last layer and move the king to the 8th rank. We're going to go ahead and do that, and the king is right here. Can we deliver checkmate in this position? You might be thinking, yes, we can just play queen to c8 or queen to a8. This checks the king, and also you might think, all right, well, this line is cut off, that must be checkmate. There is one issue here. If you were to play either of those moves, black would simply take the rook. Now, not to panic, this is still winning, but there's actually a forced checkmate sequence in 2, which is much simpler. And the point is, we just swing the rook over to the left. This way, neither of the pieces are in danger anymore, and you can simply deliver checkmate on the next move. We're still cutting off both these ranks from the king, so it can't move anywhere. We're going to go ahead and do that. Rook right here. And lastly, we move the queen here. All those lines are cut off for the king, and you win. Now, the 2 rooks mate is very similar to the queen and rook mate. It borrows a lot of the same concepts, and you still use a ladder mate process to do so. The only difference is one of the rooks is not as powerful since it's not a queen, but that's not an issue. We have our 2 rooks and king here versus the king. We're going to follow the exact same process. The king right now has access to all of these squares. How can we cut it off? Well, we can play rook to h5, which cuts off this entire row for the king and everything beyond it. We're going to go ahead and do that. Rook to h5, the king moves to the side. Can we restrict the king even more? We can. We can play rook to a6, and all of these lines are cut off for the king. The king is forced back. Now, since the king is attacking the rook, we want to spend a move just getting it safe. So we're going to swing it all the way to the right. Not all the way, though, because then we'd have some issue correlating the rooks. One space over. This is good. We're cutting off all these lines for the king, and now we have a checkmate in 2 sequence. We simply bring this rook up. All of these lines are cut off. And the last move, you guys might be able to guess, is rook to g8. And now all the spaces are cut off for the king, and you win the game. Now we're going to be discussing the queen and bishop mate. The order this goes in is the pieces that are most important to the least important. So The queen and queen mate would be the easiest, so we didn't even discuss it. Queen and rook mate is quite simple. 2 rooks mate is pretty easy, but the queen and bishop mate is where some beginners might be having some difficulty. Now we have a light square bishop here and a queen. How can we correlate these pieces to deliver a checkmate? Well, we can put our bishop on a square where it's active right here in the center. We slowly just want to make the king crawl into the edge of the board. We're going to use the queen and the bishop to do so. I'm playing these moves very fast. It's just kind of second nature to me. Really, it's just a matter of correlating these pieces. Now, we can play queen here, further pushing the king to the side of the board. I think we'll just go off this position. Yeah, the best option is here. Really just using the queen because it's our major piece. We're going to go here, which cuts off this entire layer for the king. And I'm just going to keep doing that. I'm going to keep on cutting layers from the king. Now, the king is here. We're going to leave it to just one layer that I can move through, which is just this one. See, the king moves there. There we go. Our checkmate. Let's see, how do we want to go about this? What is the best way to deliver checkmate here? It's with the queen. Yeah, there we go. Queen to b1. And this is defended by the bishop. We're just going to deliver checkmate. Now we have the queen and knight mate, which is a bit different from the queen and bishop mate. The queen and the knight is very powerful because the knight covers all the squares that the queen can't. It moves in an L shape, which is the only direction that the queen really just can't go, is in diagonals, and also jump over pieces. But that won't be necessary here because black only has their king. We're just going to coordinate our pieces, as you can guess. We're going to use the king here this time as well, just to make things easier. Once again, it's the same idea where we just cut off the king's layers. Here, I've done it very fast. The king is already cut off to the 8th rank. We're just going to keep moving our knight by. Here, if we go, yeah, we can check the king here. King moves over, and finally deliver checkmate with the knight. There we go. Now our last 2 checkmates, which I think are the most important, are the queen mate and the rook mate. Now, the queen and king mate is harder than all the ones we've discussed because we don't have any minor or major pieces to assist us. We only have the queen and the king. So how can we go about this? Well, we can use our queen to cut off layers, just like we did in the last game. Here, we can move to this square since it's defended by the king. We're just going to continuously move to squares where we're cutting off more layers from the king. There we go. Continuously pushing off the queen to the king to the side. And we finally end up in a position where everything here is cut off from the king. Everything here. So the king has to move through just these 2 squares. What we're going to do is we're going to bring the king into this box and deliver checkmate. The king is forced back and forth. We can bring our king in. And now we end up in this perfect position where everything is lined up perfectly for us to deliver a checkmate. Now, there's one important thing that I need to discuss for all of these checkmates is avoiding stalemate, which is extremely important. While you're in the process of pushing the king to the edge of the board, one thing that might happen is you have to be very careful because you can end up stalemating the king very easily. In this position, if you were to play queen to c7, black has no moves. Black cannot go here, or go here. Why is this? The queen is covering all these squares. So what happens? This game is actually a draw. You can see here, this game is a draw. And this is a huge blunder from our side because this really should have been a game that we win up a queen. But it's a draw because black has no moves, and this position is called stalemate. How can you avoid this? Well, every move, just think, is there anywhere that our king can move if we go? Or sorry, the black king can move if we were to play. So if I were to play this, is there anywhere the black king can move? Absolutely not. We're not going to play that. We have to give him some breathing room. Instead, we're just going to let him move back and forth, bring our king over. It's the exact same checkmate as last time. Now we have our rook mate, which is probably the most complicated. This one is, I'd say, the first advanced checkmate that we're going to look at because a lot of players still don't know this, even pretty high into their rating category. But the concepts here are actually very similar to the queen and king checkmate. You're just going to swing the rook down and continuously cut off layers for the king. Here, I'm going to use the rook to cut off all this space from the king. The king is forced to move up. We're going to move the king up, and the same process repeats. We can drop the rook. Let's see. Drop the rook right here, yeah. And then we're just going to keep moving our king up, forcing it into squares where it's not as easy to move. Let's see right here. Rook there should be good. We're going to move our king, force it. You can see it's checkmate in 8. Move this rook right here, cut off all these lines for the king. I'm going to move our king to the side, which cuts off all these. Now, when you're in positions like this happens a lot in the rook mate, where the king and the king are faced with a 1 square difference. Since all these squares are cut off from our king, we can actually pop our rook in here, hit the king, and it's going to be forced into the back because he has none of these squares that can go to. We're going to go ahead and do that. And now we're in a position where this has become very easy because the rook is cutting off all of this space from the king. So we're going to go ahead and pop our king into here. And now we can slowly just start crawling the rook over. We can bring our king in right here. Now rook can swing to the side. How do we want to go about this? Let's see. King opposition. Yeah, just keep on pushing the king to the side. There, king will probably move back. No. Now, at any point in time, if the king were to move back over here, we can deliver checkmate. It's the same concept as before, where the king is cutting off all these layers. Now, it's a checkmate in 2. Once we move here, the king moves back, and we can deliver a checkmate on e8. All right, so this one I'd say is not as important if you're starting out. I think the most important checkmates that you need to learn really are the ladder mate. That one is extremely fundamental, especially with the queen and the rook or 2 queens. You can find this position on Lee Chess if you go to learn and then practice, click on piece checkmates 1. This one is vital because you will actually see it very often. And I'd say the most important checkmate that you need to learn, other than the ladder mate, would be the queen mate before you get into the rook mate. And there's a full category there with advanced checkmates. There's a knight and bishop mate, the 2 bishops mate. There's a good deal of them, really. But this one is the most important, the queen mate and the ladder mate. Make sure you take good note of how to do these. Now, me explaining it, I don't think is enough for you. I really do think you should go out there and try this. You're going to see it in your game, so it's important. If you go into Lee Chess practice section, you'll notice this and you'll be able to utilize this. But once again, I'm just going to go over it. It's really just a matter of cutting off layers for the king. You can do this with only the queen and eventually get the king into a position where it is fully cut off, all the sides for where it can go to. As you can see here, this entire box. And once again, we're just going to bring the king over and deliver checkmate. And that's it, really. We've gone over all 3 stages of the game, important plans that you can use in them. Realistically, if I were to put everything into a too long didn't read, I'd say in the opening, you want to focus on developing your pieces, controlling the center, and getting your king safe. That's the most important. In endgames, you should focus on the queen and rook mate, along with the queen mate, because those 2 are very fundamental and extremely common. And in the middle game, you want to focus on the 2 tactics that we discussed, which would be the pin and the skewer. Always keeping a lookout. And the most important thing is always looking for checks, captures, and attacks in every single position, because that is what's going to get you. That is what's putting you ahead of your opponent, is that thought process and the concepts that you're using. And that really is the strategy in a chess game, is just that idea, the mindset that you're always looking for forcing moves. You're always looking for the checks. You're always looking for the captures. You're always looking for the attacks, even when you're in a position where you're playing defensively. From move 1, you're keen, you're ready, and you're vigilant. You're looking for how can I put my opponent in an uncomfortable position. And that, I think, is the most important, is just that mindset and how you're looking at the game. There's lots of ways that you can look at the chessboard. I think if the best way to get better at chess is just going to be playing online, not playing with bots, which a lot of people do. They'll go on chess.com, they'll go on Lee Chess, they'll play Stockfish Level 1 or the different program bots that you can find on there. I don't think this is your best way about going about improving. Now, this is for the sole reason that bots simply just don't play like normal human beings do. If you go online to Lee Chess or chess.com and go for online playings and blitz games, rapid games, classical games, you're going to play real people. And what you get out of this is real experience. And you're going to get to use all of these concepts that we discussed. Straight out of the opening, immediately you're going to be able to use all of these ideas. And I think that's very important. What else can you do to help improve in chess? I'd say books you can put aside for a bit, but before that, you can find a lot of content online in YouTube and Twitch. There's so much content that you can find, instructive content. I'd recommend the YouTube channels Gotham Chess and Eric Rosen. They both discuss all of these concepts in detail. You can find lots of ideas in endgames, tactics, basically anything else that you can imagine in chess strategy. But that's it, really. That's all I have for you today. I think we went over a lot of stuff that was very important. Tactics and endgames, most vital stuff. You really want to go over these concepts in games. And also, I'd say the most important is getting on Lichess and getting that practice in. That's something I'd recommend all of you do if you're interested in chess. Go to lichess.org, which is the website I use for this entire thing. Make an account and start utilizing the puzzle section. That, I'd say, is something I didn't mention, is absolutely vital. And I'm just going to show that because of really how important that is in getting better at chess, is not only just playing games, which is very important, but also utilizing puzzles. Because I've seen people climb hundreds of rating points online in just months or weeks by just doing puzzles. Now, if you go to Lichess, you make your account. Right here at the top, there's puzzles. And within the puzzle section, it's just going to give you puzzles based on your rating. All it is positions that's taken from real games in real time that have been played recently. And what you're going to do is just look for the best move. And in every single position, it's the same exact idea. You're looking for checks, captures, and attacks. If you go into puzzle themes, you feel like you need to work on a specific idea. You can take something that's a lot simpler for you or something that you don't understand very well. Maybe made in one. I actually used 2 of these puzzles for this demonstration. If you go to made in one, you can set it to easiest. And you can really just look here for your checks, captures, and attacks. Is there any checkmate in one moves? I see it immediately. Knight to f7 delivers checkmate. So puzzles, absolutely vital on Lichess. They give you a great selection. It's completely free, which is amazing. Another section right here, learn if you go to practice. This is also where I borrowed some of the concepts. Right here, you can look over the pin and the skewer. You can also look over piece checkmates. If you have the time, really, I'd recommend you go through all of this because just going over this will set you ahead of so many other players at your rating category as a beginner or intermediate player. And that's it. That's all I have for you today. I hope you were able to learn something new, and I hope you were able to understand more about strategy and chess tactics. There's really so much out there that you can learn about it. I think it's extremely interesting, and I spent a lot of time researching these tactics, not only for you today, but just for myself. Whether it was doing thousands of puzzles on Lichess or trying to incorporate these tactics into my games. It's been a lot of fun, and I think you guys will get a lot out of this as well. Just get out there, play, have fun with chess, and have a good time, really. I hope you enjoyed my presentation today. You were able to learn something new. And once again, thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for the informative and wonderful webinar and your time and effort, Fawz. Next, I would like to invite the Vice President of FOSA, Abdun Nazir, to share a few words.
Thanks, Nia. It's really interesting. Fawz, excellent presentation. It's my privilege to have been asked to extend a vote of thanks on this occasion. On behalf of FOSA Canada President Haseena Mehfil and Organizing Committee, I extend a very hearty vote of thanks to all participants. I would like to express our sincere thanks to Fawz Mehfil for an excellent presentation, chess strategies and tactics, and our host, Neha Shanawaz, for leading the webinar in a very pleasant and excellent way of communication to audience. Our sincere thanks to Honorable Minister P.A. Mohammed Riyaz, Minister for Public Works Department and Tourism, Government of Kerala, FOSA Central Committee General Secretary, Yousuf Sir, FOSA Dubai President, Rashid K, FOSA UK President, Roxy B, FOSA USA President, KunjuMohammed. Well, an event like this cannot happen overnight. The wheel starts rolling months ago. It requires proper planning and bird's eye for details. Our special thanks to FOSA Canada Treasurer Tanveer and Mehfil for your great effort and help. Please stay tuned, FOSA Canada, for future activities. Once again, thank you all for making this program a great success. Thank you. Back to Neha.
As we've approached the end of our amazing event, I would like to once again thank Fawz for his time and effort in putting together this successful event. I would also like to thank the FOSA team for organizing this seminar as well. And finally, thank you to all of our participants for your attention in this session. I feel like I've learned a lot from this session. I hope all of you feel the same way as well. Most importantly, I hope that you all had fun. It's been a great pleasure to be with all of you today. I hope you guys have a great day.